right, so we should have talked about like chemistry basics in class today. And the next portion of these notes are properties of water. So you should be doing this for homework today. So a little bit of an overview of the properties of water that we'll go over is right here. So there are 7 of them that we'll talk about, all the way from polarity to the fact that water is a universal solvent. Okay. So the biggest one, and I think the most important one, because it's important to understand what polarity is and how it affects the properties of water. And not even just the properties of water, but the properties of other molecules that are also polar. So polarity is the unequal sharing of the electrons, which make water a polar molecule. If you look at this graphic, this is one water molecule. And we have an oxygen and 2 hydrogens. And oxygen is very electronegative. If you remember what we said electronegativity is, oxygen is very, very electronegative, and therefore it holds on to electrons more so than the hydrogen does within these bonds. So since it's holding on to like more of those electrons that they're sharing together, then oxygen is partially negative, and now we have hydrogen, which are partially positive because they don't have such a grasp on those electrons that they're sharing. Okay, so this is a polar covalent bond because most of the electrons, even though it's a covalent bond and they're sharing those electrons, most of the electrons are being pulled a little bit closer to oxygen than they are to hydrogen. Okay. So the next one is cohesion, and this is the attraction of molecules for other molecules of the same kind. So in this instance, we're talking about water molecules that are attracted to other water molecules. And these are through hydrogen bonds, and these are between the water molecules, and it holds them together and increases their cohesive forces. So this also allows for the transport of water and nutrients against gravity in plants. Because plants have to get their water all the way from their roots, or from their roots all the way up to their leaves. So this is how they do it, through cohesion. And this is also responsible for something called surface tension. And this is a property that allows water to resist external forces. And if you've ever seen, like in a pond or a lake or something, those little like water bugs that skim across the surface of the water, the reason that they can do that is because water, if you think about, I don't know if I can draw this. No, maybe not. But if you think about like how water is placed with the bonds on the top, on the very surface of like any body of water, the bonds are going to be really, really strong horizontally because they have nothing to grab onto on the top because they're on the top. So because of this, since the hydrogen bonds are so strong between the water molecules on the surface of any body of water, there's something called surface tension, where there's a thin little barrier in which small things can sit on. So you can drop maybe like a paper clip or something in a cup of water, and it's not going to immediately sink until you break that little barrier, and then it might sink. So that is surface tension. But a cohesion essentially is when water molecules stick together. And think about it, co means together. They're sticking together. All right, and then adhesion is a little bit different. So this is the clinging of one molecule to a different molecule, and this is due to the polarity of water. So in plants, this allows water to cling to the cell walls in order to resist the downward pull of gravity. Again, this is important for plants to get all of their nutrients and their water up to their leaves. So adhesion is when water molecules stick to the xylem of the wall. To the xylem wall of a plant. So this is what's happening here. So again, this is cohesion, they're sticking together, and then this is adhesion when they're sticking to the plant. Okay, and this is just another visual of this. I won't go super into it because I just said it. But again, adhesion is sticking to the xylem of the plant. Cohesion is sticking to each other, water molecules sticking to one another. And this allows for the transpiration of water in plants. So without this, plants would not be able to get their water and their nutrients. So if you see that, I mean, you can see how these water molecules are kind of sticking to the xylem, but also being dragged upwards because they're being stuck, or they're sticking to one another as well. Okay. So the next one is capillary action, and this is the upward movement of water due to the forces of cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension. So this is like a putting it all together property of water because it involves all three of those. And it occurs when adhesion is greater than cohesion. So adhesion has to be greater because it needs to stick to the walls more so than it sticks to the water. Because if the water molecules were more attracted to each other and less attracted to the xylem walls, then they would just sit at the bottom and just stick to each other and not to the walls. So it's important for transport of water and nutrients in plants, and capillary action occurs moving water upwards. Okay. All right, next one is temperature control. So water has a very high specific heat, and this means that it resists changes in temperature quite significantly. And this is from hydrogen bonds. So heat must be absorbed in order to break hydrogen bonds. But heat is released when hydrogen bonds form. So we like as how do I explain it? Because water is absorbing so much heat in order to break those bonds, and that's how evaporation happens. If it gets too hot, those bonds will break, and the hydrogen molecules will evaporate. But because it has to absorb so much heat before that happens, water will continue to absorb that heat until that breakage happens. So the importance of high specific heat is that it moderates air temperature. So for example, large bodies of water can absorb heat in the daytime, and they can also release heat at night. And this stabilizes, probably most importantly, the ocean temperatures. And this benefits obviously marine life, because if water were too hot, if it were as hot as outside, for example, then marine life would not be, it wouldn't be a viable ecosystem for marine life. So organisms can also resist changes in their own internal temperature. We are made up of 70% water. So because we have such a high specific heat, that overall stabilizes our temperature, and that is really important because we need to stay at a very, very, very narrow range in temperature. Okay, and then we also have evaporative cooling. So water has a high heat of vaporization. So the molecules with the highest kinetic energy leave as gas. That's how evaporation happens, and that's how we sweat, for example. So if water gets too hot, it evaporates, and it keeps the actual, like, the rest of the water at a lower temperature. And the same thing happens for us as humans, or for other animals that sweat, because once if we get too hot, the water molecules that are hottest will just leave our body as sweat. Okay. So that's what evaporative cooling is. So it moderates Earth's climate. It also stabilizes the temperature in lakes and ponds, and it prevents terrestrial organisms from overheating. So think sweating in humans. This also prevents leaves from becoming too warm in the sun. So leaves will do the same thing, and it evaporates the super hot water. All right, next one is density, or why ice floats. So as water solidifies, it expands and becomes less dense, and this is because, again, of hydrogen bonds. Because of the hydrogen bonds, it's going to form a crystalline structure that looks like this. So when cooled, water molecules move too slowly to break the bonds, and this allows marine life to survive under floating sheets. So obviously, if ice did not float, if it sank, then when large bodies of water froze over, the marine life would not survive. Okay, so hydrogen bonds cause water molecules to form this crystalline structure, like I said. So I want you to imagine the 3D crystalline structure of ice. So how many hydrogen bonds can one molecule of water make with its neighboring water molecules? And you're going to answer this in the Ed puzzle. So the answer is 4. All right, so the last one that we'll talk about is the fact that water is a universal solvent, and solvent is just a dissolving agent in a solution. Water is a versatile or universal solvent, and its polar molecules are attracted to ions and other polar molecules that it can form hydrogen bonds with. So a solution is a homogeneous mix of 2 or more substances. A solvent is the dissolving agent in a solution, and a solute is a substance that's dissolved. And we'll use these vocabulary words quite a bit in AP. But yeah, so water, because it's polar, those molecules are attracted to ions and other polar molecules that it forms hydrogen bonds with, which breaks down the other molecules, if that makes sense. So it's going to break down, for example, salt is NaCl, and water wants to bond with both of those, and in doing so, it breaks the bonds between NaCl, so sodium and chloride, and in breaking it down, it dissolves it. Okay. So like dissolves like, water can interact with sugars or proteins containing many oxygen and hydrogen. Water will form hydrogen bonds with the sugar or protein in order to dissolve it. So that's what I just said. That was the example with the salt that I just talked about. And this is an example of that. So this is water, obviously, and then this is glucose. And because it wants to bond with more hydrogens, it's going to start breaking down that sugar. And it's doing that here too. It's breaking down this hydrogen. It's breaking down this hydrogen because it wants to keep bonding with these hydrogens and oxygens. All right. So we're almost done, I promise. But ionic compounds, the partially negative oxygen in water will interact with a positive atom. So the partially positive hydrogen in water will interact with a negative atom. So again, this is the example that I brought up a second ago. But if we have salt, salt is made up of sodium, which is a cation, and then chloride, which is an anion. So sodium is surrounded by oxygen, and then the chloride will be surrounded by the hydrogens, and that is what breaks up the salt. So this dissolves the ions, essentially. Okay. So we will be working hopefully on a water properties station lab on Friday and on Monday. So I will get you situated for that. But that is it. Have a great day.